Hi everyone, I'm Jesse Lynn.
And I'm Angela Lynn, and welcome back to another episode of But Where Are You Really From? Today is a special episode because it's actually our 2-year pod-versary. What?
Momentous.
Yeah. Honestly, I did not ever, I didn't think about what it would feel like at 2 years, but I don't know. I didn't forecast it out where I was like, in 2 years from today, we're going to be blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of weird.
In terms of active commitments, and I mean active commitments like not my cell phone bill, not my utility bill, not my rent, this is probably like number three on the longest active commitment I have had after like a personal relationship, my cat. This is it. I don't count like if all personal relationships were like friends, everything.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah. It is funny that we've been doing this for 2 years and there's still tech problems. Like, I know
Dude.
we're like remote
Yeah.
and everything, but there's like no good way to do that. Honestly, there isn't a good way to do this. Like, if you're super on the go and you don't have a good internet connection, it can be a little bit tricky.
Yes, actually, let's talk about that for sure. But if you have not heard what we were just talking about, basically every single time Jesse and I record, 2 years in now, even
Something's
still,
always off.
there's always tech issues. And we've been using the same recording platform at least in the last 6 months or so, too. And every single time, without fail, we still have issues somehow.
It is how it is, I feel like, honestly.
I think the only people who don't have recording issues are people who record by themselves on their hardware or in person in a legit studio with
Yeah.
a DSLR camera or whatever. But anyone who has to rely on remote streaming stuff like we do, it's a, can of worms.
It's very it's curious for me though whether people enjoy that format more, like the in studio when there's video content associated versus recording remotely where you could be anywhere. I don't know. I feel like my favorite podcast stuff where people have added video stuff, the video stuff is fun to watch because it's completely unhinged. It's the studio space is very, what we've been talking about, what's real, what's raw and emotional and what people are drawn to and what's too produced. And I feel like when you're beaming in from wherever you are, it's really much more realistic.
Yeah.
And it's not super produced and things can go crazy at any 1 second. And I feel like sometimes people vibe off that energy. They're that's part of your dynamic in terms of how you bounce on and off of those weird one-off situations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with that, but it feels like this is already naturally kind of segueing into the different formats that we've tried since we started versus now. So we've always been remote because you and we've been friends since we were 5 and 6 years old, respectively. But since I left New York, which was in 2015 or something. Yeah.
Something like that.
You and I haven't lived in the same place, but we've stayed best friends. So when we started this during the pandemic, it always was going to be remote anyway.
Yeah.
Versus a lot of podcasts, they started in person and then they had to figure out how to transition to remote.
Yeah.
But speaking of remote versus in person, one of my favorite formats that we did was the few episodes that we got to record in person with each other. I think it did introduce new challenges because neither of us is we don't do videography and photography as our true hobbies. So figuring out the setup was kind of janky and we don't have the right mics technically for in person, but there is something to be said about the energy that you have when it's in person.
Yeah.
You can feed off each other a little more. There's more direct body language and all that stuff.
Yeah, I agree because it's like having a talk show, but your guest is remote. It's just so hard to maintain your connection to that person and also everything else that's happening in the background. So yeah, the in-person was definitely a little bit more fun, a little less weird miscommunications situation. Yeah. And obviously, no real tech issues aside from the setup difficulty.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how interesting this is to anyone listening, but the main challenge we had with the in-person setup was the way that remote work works is that we each have our own mics, we each are like dialing in, so we each have separate video feeds and audio feeds. So like, the two of us are kind of a mess. So sometimes we like talk over each other, we're like laughing over each other, someone like burps or like does something funny, and we can always like fake it because we can cut out like one person's video or audio and it wouldn't disturb the other person's thing. But when it was in person, it was like, oh shit, we realized how like annoying we are when we like talk over each other.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because it was all one feed. So it was like, well, here we are.
Well, I will interject with a listener question. Let us know. Do you want us to keep in the fuck ups? Because we can do that. And you guys can see all of the messiness behind the production.
I mean, truly, I don't think anyone realizes how chaotic we usually are in our recordings.
It is very, yeah.
So I think largely what we were going to use this episode for was kind of reflecting like then versus now, when we first started and how it's progressed. I mean, starting with kind of like how we started this thing and like why we started this thing versus kind of intent now. For sure, this originally started as like a hobby, right? Like I remember, start of the pandemic is when we started this podcast. It was like, we're 2 years in, so it's end of March was like our first published episode. Peak shutdown, the 2 weeks to the, what did we say? It was like 2 weeks to squash the curve or flatten the curve or whatever.
Flatten the curve. Flatten the curve.
Yeah. It was like around that time, and it had already been more than 2 weeks, but I think we were like, oh, this won't be forever. Let's just like find something to like entertain ourselves while we're bored. And I remember approaching you like, would you be interested in this? And luckily you were. And we just like did shits and giggles, and we didn't know what the hell we were doing. I think we tried like, now we use Squadcast. That's our like main recording platform. But I think we tried every single one that was out there, like all the streaming things. But we never had this as like, it was always going to be like a side thing of like, after work or like spare time that we can find. And then, 2 years later, it's like definitely been the most consistent thing I think either of us has been doing outside of work and personal relationships, like you said. And as we discussed a few episodes back, like at least on my end, I'm making this full time because of like how meaningful I found this podcast to be, and brings me a lot of joy. Yeah.
Oh, yay. Well, I will say on my part, the beginning's very much the same. I was like, oh, you want to make a podcast? Is it easy? And you were like, yes, you could just do like this. And I was like, okay. Because I was basically just like, oh, I'm going to like talk to you like every week. That sounds awesome. And I do feel like what's changed is, although it's still not my full-time gig, I feel like the topics that we embark on are a lot more aggressive is not the right word. They're a lot more in depth, I feel like. Really, like when we started, it was mostly just like us speculating about stuff, which sometimes it still is that, but I do feel like we brought in a lot more interesting topics and some more serious conversations that people have really vibed with. And that's been really interesting for me because it's fun to, even after knowing you for so long, you never know everything about the other person, right? And so as we pick new topics, I'm like, oh, cool. Like, I didn't know you thought of this way, or you had this opinion about this something. And so, yeah, it's definitely been just like a really fun experience. And also just all the guests that we've had have been like a lot of fun to talk with them and see what their world lived perspective is. So yeah. It's been a really, what's the word? Rewarding experience.
Rewarding, yes. Well, we'll circle back on the guests thing in a bit, but yeah, I agree with what you just said. I feel like the topics that we bring, I mean, again, then versus now, right? Like when we first started this thing, I think we really were using it more as our own means of like exploring our identity, right? Because of the whole thing was like, are we Asian enough or American enough? Doesn't feel like either. And like, let's explore what this means. And I do think in the beginning, it started a little bit more surface level where we kind of hit the like classic things that people want to talk about when it comes to this identity. So like model minority myth and like career trajectory and what was it called? Bamboo ceiling? Yeah, not the
Yeah,
glass
bamboo
ceiling.
ceiling.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
of course, that's important, but I don't think we were delving as deep.
Yeah.
And now, like, at least for me, hopefully for you too, I feel like the subjects that we talk about now, like, we do go so deep that honestly, this is like my second form of therapy. Like, when I'm not with my therapist, I'm like, I'm working out a lot of my own shit through this
Oh
podcast
my
with you.
gosh, 100%. It's like, it is kind of like therapy because I feel like the first season it was very like surface level topics and surface level conversations. And then kind of as we ran out of surface things to talk about, we were like, oh, wait, like, what are the things, when we're planning everything, like, what are the things that really interested us? I think interested other people. And those were the topics which are like the most real. And that's why I was like telling you recently when I was like, oh, like I said, so like, my new company, there's this tradition of like when you join, you send an all company email that's like, hi, this is me, like here's me. And so I did that. And I wrote that I started podcasts. I didn't put the link because I was like, I don't know, this is explicit content. But I was like, ask me about it, and somebody did, and I was like, like, there's so much stuff on here that I don't know if I want like people that I've never really met yet to know about me. So yeah, It is
Right.
very personal.
Yeah, I agree. It's super vulnerable. And, well, I mean, to your point earlier about like the raw versus polished thing, right?
Yeah.
I think that is why people initially were interested in podcasts is like, I mean, the easiest way to describe it is like it's like radio, but everyone can do it. But honestly, I think the best performing ones are usually ones that are more raw, like less produced, right? Like there's a niche for the ones that like basically sound like a TV show, but it's audio only. But a lot of the good ones are because it's like the people, the hosts really share like a lot about themselves, and you feel like you're in this like intimate conversation with them, and that's what's interesting to people. So we're putting a lot of ourselves into this, and hopefully it's resonating with folks that we aren't really shielding a whole lot when we like talk about these topics. We are just kind of like presenting exactly what we think and our experiences. And I think we've discussed this, but we want to do a little bit more of that too. Like a lot of times with these topics, I think we speculate on, like this is how I feel and like something like that. But a lot of times we don't go into like, this is a specific experience that I had that relates to that. And maybe we'll crack open a little bit more of that vulnerability in the upcoming episodes.
Ooh, I think I need a drink for that.
Well, go for it. It's 10 a.m. for you in California. For once, we're almost like flip-flopped
Yes.
on time
Reverse.
zones.
Reverse.
Yeah, so Jesse is calling in from our hometown, Irvine, California.
My bedroom, the bedroom that I lived and grew up in that you can't see
Oh
anything
my
of.
God. Is that weird? Is that weird for you?
It is a little bit every time I come back because it's kind of like a shrine to me.
And I am dialing in from Chicago. We just got here 2 nights ago, and we're going to be here for like a week and a half. But I was telling Jesse before we hit record, it's like, obviously we record like a little bit in advance of when we publish, so we have some time to do the editing and whatever. So this is March 12th, and it's randomly the day Chicago celebrates St. Patty's. Like, it's a full 5 days before the actual day of St. Patrick's Day, but they like always celebrate, I guess, the Saturday before, even if it's like almost a full week before. And I didn't know that / forgot, so it's like a little bit of a mess. Yeah, if you hear like laughing and like drunk people or whatever, it's because it's St. Patty's and I'm in a hotel.
It's surprisingly quiet. I didn't really hear anything until that
okay.
moment of people laughing and talking.
Well, there may be more sounds, so sorry, y'all. Well, let's hop around a little. You mentioned guests earlier. I think we're reflecting back on kind of like favorite moments. So do you have, it feels a little like favorite children here, but do you have a favorite guest that we have?
Oh, that is really difficult. I have to say probably it's a tie between Anna and Cherry because okay, so I like those conversations because I learned a lot during the conversation. It wasn't a dull conversation. Like, not that any of our guests are dull, but sometimes you guys don't see that there are like awkward moments where we're like Because
Yeah.
it's like the first time you meet someone, so it's
Yeah.
like sometimes we have like a thing, you know, general prompts of like we want to talk about, but sometimes it just gets into like weird dull air time. And but I felt like those conversations were very lively. I learned a lot of things about each of their expertise and their knowledge and their perspectives, and it made me think about certain things differently afterwards. So I was like, oh yeah, this is like a really cool to have this conversation with this person, because I don't think otherwise I may have gotten the opportunity to meet someone like that or to talk to someone like that.
Nice.
What about you?
Yeah. Well, before I address that, just so people know, you mentioned this, but like a lot of times our guests, we didn't know them ahead of time. Like,
Yeah, like most of the time.
in the early days,
Yeah.
we were pulling from like our friends and whatnot
Yes.
that kind of like tie into topics, and we still tap into them now and then. But like a lot of times, literally, it's like we just kind of like cold outreach, or their publicists reach out to us or whatever, and we connect, and we think it'll be a good show, and then we meet them the 15 minutes prior to like the recording starting. And so you don't, especially when it's remote, right? You don't always you're not always able to like make that connection without the body language and the in-person whatever. So yeah, you are not seeing a lot of the awkward shit that we got out sometimes.
It's a good time though. It really is.
Yeah.
So your favorite babies.
Mine, I also have two that tie in my heart. One is my dad, honestly.
Okay.
He was our first guest.
That's true. Your dad
He
is
was
an
fun.
OG. Yeah, he was.
He's such a he's so unexpected. I feel like a lot of the stuff he says, you're just like, what? Especially him being my dad. So I like feel like I know him to a certain extent. And then he says something, I'm like, what? I
Wait,
never would have thought
so
you'd say that.
sidebar, would you ever
Yeah.
do marijuana with your dad?
Oh, no, but not actually because it's me and my dad. I just don't like doing weed anymore after doing psychedelics.
Okay, understood. Got it.
Yeah. I mean, if he was like, I really want to do this with you as like a bonding thing, sure, maybe, I guess. But he smoked before.
I know.
Because-
That's why I'm
yeah.
asking. I know. Your dad is like, I feel like my parents know that, and they're like,
My dad's like a free spirit in a old man body. Yeah. So yeah, my dad is one. And then I really liked our conversation with other Anna, Anna and Ziad, when we did the 9/11 episode, because I mean, it's something that we are going to try to do more of as we go forward with the podcast, but I like branching out. Like, we started this around Asian American identity, but the more that we talk to people, the more we're seeing like crossovers and shared experiences. And I really like that conversation because it was definitely like, I mean, we were reflecting on the Arab American experience post 9/11, and like, you and I are just observers to that, right? Like, we couldn't like speak to that firsthand, but as they were sharing their experiences, like, I think I learned a lot about perspective and like how people treat other people that, like, you know, we firsthand wouldn't have experienced necessarily without hearing them share. But also I found a lot of connection points. Like, I think Ziad mentioned that a couple times. He's I mean, even our podcast name, they were like, I feel a weird kinship to that phrase. Yeah, even though it's not, you didn't write it with me in mind. So I like that because it's kind of like shows the potential of our kind of like branching out of this community, and like how many more perspectives and stories that we can like envelop in.
Nice. Well, speaking of, since we are already talking about guests, we should just talk about the associate thing. What's your favorite topic that we've discussed so far? We've done so many, honestly.
We've done so many topics. Okay, so I thought a little bit about this before we recorded, and I think I goofed up because I lumped in topic and format into the same thing. I enjoy most of our topics, honestly. Like, I mean, you and I spend a lot of time brainstorming which topics we want to talk about, and we only put in the effort if it's something we actually have like a genuine interest in anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't have like one topic that stands out to me, but format-wise, I have thought about this, and who knows if our listeners actually like it, but for me, the most fun formats were anything kind of like gamified.
Okay,
So I really
yeah.
liked when we did the guess fake or real COVID headlines, where we did that to each other. The
Okay.
original Go Home We're Drunk.
Yeah.
I liked the Price is All Right, where we did the crossover with the Real Asian
Yes. Yes.
podcast
Yes. Yes.
folks.
Yes.
It's just like, it keeps it more fun for us, right? Because it's like less just talking. It's like, who knows what's going to happen? It's a little like more lighthearted, and yeah. I
Nice.
don't know. Those are fun for me. How
Okay,
about you?
that makes sense. I will do topic, and I probably am skewing based off of just recency, but I really like the fortune teller one we did because it's the same kind of thing. Like, although my parents were not on the pod and your parents are not on the pod, it like forced me to have a conversation with them about
Yes.
it because I had to ask to know, to report back basically like what their perspective is and like what their knowledge is. So actually it's like very interesting conversation to have with them. And I feel like the older they are now and the farther away that I am, because I mean, it's not like I'm getting farther away. I am exactly where I am, like distance wise all the time for the most part.
Yeah.
They're like much more open to just like blabbing about random stuff. So like we started
Yeah.
with that topic and they were still talking about it, but just like so many different facets of it that I was like, oh, I just needed like, you know, the basics. Like, I don't know what
I
this
wanted
is.
like a one sentence answer. And you
Yeah, I
gave
was
me,
like, I don't know
a
what the
3 hour.
rest of this is. Like, you guys are talking about. It was like very detailed, and I was like,
Yeah.
I think it just goes to show. Like for me, I was like, oh, I didn't know you guys knew all this stuff. Like,
Yes.
why do you know all of this stuff? Like, it's one of those things, and so it was just a good topic to help me talk to more people, specifically my parents,
Yeah.
and have conversations with people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, I did think about this. And now you're reminding me that I did think about this. I don't have a specific episode like you of like fortune teller, but I
Yeah.
agree. I think all the ones where we've had to ask our parents for like supplemental information or experiences, I've enjoyed all of those topics because so like one that jumped out at me but is not necessarily like favorite, but for Halloween during our first like round of doing the pod, we did scary stories from the motherland, and we asked our parents to like share a real story each that we could talk about. But like all of them, right? We also did the names episode where
Yep.
we delved into like Chinese
That was
names
also
and how we were
interesting.
named.
Yep.
Yeah. And to your point, it's like the perfect excuse to force us to talk to our parents and about things that they wouldn't normally talk to us about.
Yeah.
I think that's been really cool. Like you said, like they're getting older, we're getting older, you know, like just things are changing. And
Yeah.
like it's nice to be able to like get into some meatier conversations with them, you know, that wouldn't come up otherwise.
Yeah.
And as a little preview, one thing we plan to do for this upcoming batch of episodes is for Mother's Day, we're going to be interviewing our respective mamas about their lives, because I just feel like a lot of times kids don't ask. They don't care to ask, or not care to ask, but we're also self-centered that we like don't think often about the fact that our parents had their own lives and they were individuals before they had family, and like
Yeah.
what was that like for them? So I'm looking forward to doing that episode with
Me
them.
too. I feel like, you know, we've talked superficially about how we feel like generally ABCs are like not friends with their parents, and like we've seen, you know, Caucasian people and they're like friends with their parents. I
Yeah.
feel like we're finally getting to this point where it's like we are making that connection. I feel like we kind of expect the parent to do that, but then I'm like,
Yeah.
maybe that's just not their, you know, that's just not their judge, because like they have this expectation that we're family and there's like no need to know each other on that level, or it's all just like assumed where we're going to be family forever. But then like, because we want that friendship, we want that connection, it's like up to us to really initiate that and try to like get that going. So yeah, I'm excited to see what they have to say. Hopefully nothing depressing.
Well, yeah, we'll find out. I have
Yeah,
no
we
idea.
will find out.
But I agree. I think onus is really on us. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of that is also because they don't know how to interact with us any other way, because it's not like they had a good mirror with their own parent relationships. Like,
Yeah, exactly. It's not the kind of thing, like, I feel like if you were to watch, like, Seventh Heaven or something, and it's Halloween time, like, the dad will tell the kids, like, a scary story. It's, like, kind of a
Sure.
very traditional-ish kind of thing, but it's not something that, like, our parents would do. They wouldn't be like, oh, it's American Halloween, we're gonna tell you Chinese ghost stories. Like,
Right.
they've never done that.
Basically, I feel like Asian parents, it's largely like a if you didn't ask me, I'm not gonna share it kind of thing.
Or like they don't think it's worth telling it to you for some reason. Or maybe they just it could be something that they just take for granted. It's like, oh, everybody in my village knew this, and I don't know. They just it's maybe it's not worth passing down, or they just assume that you know. I don't know.
I'm excited for it because every time I've asked one of my parents for more information, like you said, like so much more comes out than you think is going to come out, and they're excited. They're more excited than I think they're going to be to like share this information.
Oh yeah. I don't honestly. I don't feel like they talk to each other about stuff like that. It's like imagine
why would they randomly?
Yeah. Well, but like because like for example, like your parents and my parents are friends. I talk to my friends about everything. But I don't know if they necessarily do the same. And so, I mean, I can just imagine, like, living your life, having never anyone asking you your experience, and someone's like, oh, I'm interested. Can you tell me about this? You'd be like, yes! Yes! What do you want to know? I've been waiting!
Aww. Okay, well, I'm excited to give our moms that chance to share everything they want to share.
We'll see. Maybe they don't.
Maybe they don't. Yeah, we'll see.
But yeah, no, I want to say that I think the talking to people has been a huge accomplishment because it's so difficult to talk to people, and I think you're at more. I know you said you're like more ambivert now, where you're like you have like levels of extroversion and introversion you need to maintain. But I've always felt like when we have gone out together, you've been able to like vibe with people very well, and I'm always really awkward when I first meet people. I'm like I realized how bad it was that I have like a list of like 5 things that are like backup questions in case I have nothing to say. So I can just be like, oh, blah. But then when I run out of those things, I'm just like, Irish exit because I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. So the fact that I have not been 100% just like on the guest episodes has been like for me.
I love it. Stretch those skills. No, I think a lot of it is more like, I guess, your personal perspective on what's happening, because I don't feel that comfortable with new people either.
Oh, okay.
Like, I think it totally depends on the situation. Like, if I'm with you and you've observed that, it's probably because I feel really comfortable with you, or like there are a couple people that maybe I already know and then you're introducing new people. But like, if I just like walked into a room of like strangers by myself, I would not be like, I love talking to you. No. Like, no. I think it's good for us both, especially with the pandemic having crushed all of our social skills. It's important for us to
for sure.
meet new people and practice that. And then I think the last thing we want to talk about, like then versus now kind of thing, is like what we've done with the podcast, like, you know, patting ourselves on the back a little bit for some shit. I think the most, it's weird because podcasting is like a thing where like it's a certain audience, and it's like it hasn't been established that long as like a format either, that there's like an Emmys or anything for that kind of shit, but there's like little nods you can have. And I think for me, the most excited I was definitely last year during the Asian American Heritage Month, Asian American Pacific Islander, AAPI, whatever, Heritage Month. Apple Podcasts created like a featured collection of like good Asian podcasts essentially, and we got featured, and I was so stoked. That felt like a really, like, it legitimized us in a way. I was like, did Apple Podcasts even know who we were? Like, it was kind of cool. Yeah.
I will say that every time someone sends a nice comment or like directly messages me that's like, I listened to it and I really liked it, it's like, oh my god, that's so nice. Because it's like, I kind of always said at the top, like, we're spilling our like blood and guts. so then when you hear people say that like, I enjoy listening to that, or I really vibed with that, it's validating, because you're like, okay, cool, like this thing that I made, that I talked about my experience, is not boring or dull, or, and like, people kind of understand it. So it's definitely like It's a really good feeling, even when it's just like one person being like, hey, I really like this particular topic or episode or whatever.
Yeah, well, it's validating and it also makes it feel like it's worth it that we, were vulnerable and like shared stuff, because if even one person is like, "Oh my God, that's exactly how I felt," and like I feel seen or whatever, it makes it all worthwhile. And that actually does relate to another then versus now for me, is like thinking about kind of how our community has shifted since starting this. So, I mean, podcasting is like traditionally it's like audio only, or some people do video, like Joe Rogan or whatever, they do video as like their base. But it's largely been like, whatever we record and put out there is like the thing. And what's shifted is like, in that format, a lot of where we are trying to engage with people is we're like, email us, or like DM us, or comment on Instagram or whatever, and like we'll talk about the episode. And I felt like we got, some people wrote us in, but it was not like an overwhelming amount of engagement. And in the last year, I've, especially since, quitting my job and making this full time, I have more time to like kind of curate how our things are published. And I've been kind of like serializing our last batch of episodes so that we can publish short form on like Instagram Reels and TikTok and stuff. And that's been really cool because we're reaching like a new audience and community that wasn't there. Like, not everyone has the appetite to listen to like 30 to 50-minute episodes, but if they watch like the TLDRs on some of these topics, they're like, oh, this is cool, and like I relate to this, or like I have questions about it or whatever. And it's been really cool because people are so much more engaged, I feel like, naturally on social media, that they're like more willing to randomly ask you questions or like pipe in on these clips. So that's something that like I want us to continue, is like kind of distributing wherever people are listening, and like being willing to engage with people wherever makes the most sense to them, as opposed to like just email us and like not having people email us.
Two things. First of all, are you saying you don't think people want to listen to us talk for 30 plus minutes?
I don't think everyone wants to listen to 30 plus minutes. No.
Second thing, I kind of agree. I would think one of the maybe like additional accomplishments or like rah-rah things that I should mention is that I definitely feel like you're not afraid to take a different direction on stuff. So like we've tried so many different things, and when it hasn't worked, we just kind of like, okay, it didn't work, move on to the next thing. And I think that that's really important in a creative pursuit, because sometimes you're so married to this baby, you're like, oh my God, this is my baby, I'm not gonna do anything with it because I love it, it's my creative output, that you forget that maybe it's not that good. And I think what's been really great is that we've, in the short 2 years, we've done so many different things, taken the format and stuff in different directions, and just been open to just being like tossing something that doesn't work, or changing something where we're like, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah,
I like that. Even though we're 2 years in, which is the topic of today, it's like I don't feel like we're so settled in exactly like the format or the types of things, or like, we fluctuate a lot between like lighthearted things, like serious topics, and like, we change things up. And I think it's great that we experiment, because it also keeps it more fun for us.
Exactly. Right? It's a different thing.
You don't want us to be bored.
Oh my God, you do not. You do not.
You would not want to listen if we were bored.
I mean, you might, but you would probably be like, what is happening?
Yeah. Well, on that note, let's move to our close, our fortune cookie, sweet treat. Fave part about doing the podcast, or maybe we already kind of covered this.
Yeah, I think so. Like for me, it's like a thing on the side that's my own that I get to work on, and I've talked to you about it. I think it's nice to have something on the side that you are working on, just to say like just to feel like you're not like 100% in just like one thing or the other. And sometimes that's what work feels like. It can feel a little overwhelmed. I'm like, oh my God, that's just work. I just have work. And so it's really important for me to figure out like different things that I can do with my time that has a creative expression and output. So I'm just not spending all of my energy on work. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it's for sure what we already talked about with like the, connecting with people who write us in and comment and stuff and ask us questions, because that makes it feel more live, like a live thing too, as opposed to like just this thing that we put out. But the other is definitely like learning new things all the time, whether that's the topic, the guest, or also like, I mean, we've learned a lot of skills, honestly, to like put out this podcast.
You did like merch for a little bit. Yeah, it was a lot of stuff.
I was doing Etsy. It was a whole thing. Yeah, I've like tried a lot of things, and also like, it does make me feel more creative too. Like now with the like serializing stuff for social, like I'm learning a lot of stuff to be able to do that, and like it's a lot of work, honestly. And sometimes people ask like, why wouldn't you just kind of like outsource that? Like you can pay someone to like edit the show or like to put out these social media clips or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, I can, but also it's hard work, but it's like kind of the fun part. It's like that's the creative part. It's like we decide what our voice is in the end with like how we edit things and like what we think is interesting enough to create clips of and that kind of stuff. So I'm like, I mean, that's the fun part. So yeah.
And what's your favorite other podcast or video podcast or audio something video combination that you're also into right now?
Yeah, well, so as you know, I spend all my time on TikTok now. So I don't listen to any like new podcasts per se, but I think we also broaden this to like kind of to any UGC type thing, right? And I have 3 creators that I like really, really love on TikTok. So one of them is like super famous. So like everyone who watches TikTok is probably like, that's old news. But it's this guy who does like animal TikToks. So basically every video of his, he's like facts about like an animal that you didn't know. But he's so funny in the way that he delivers it, because so, for example, he talks about orcas or killer whales a lot. Yeah. And then he'll just, like, be rattling off the facts, and he'll be like, these murder Oreos, like, blah, blah, blah. So he has, like, this, like, dark humor that he has attached to it. And then he genuinely knows, like, so much random shit that you're like, what? So his name is, and sorry if I'm butchering it, Mamadou Nadiye? I'm not sure. But he also, it's cool because, like usernames, you're like, that's definitely your birthday. He has 97 in it, so I'm like, damn, you're 7 years younger than me. But he has, Gen Z is killing it. He has like, I don't know, it's like 14 million followers or some shit like that. And he is publishing a book. There's a pre-order out now about like animal facts, and I'm sure it's written in his like very humorous way. So like, go him. Second person I like is someone named Austin Cho. So originally I came across this stuff because I guess I was watching like Asian creator things, but he often isn't talking about Asian stuff. His like little niche that he's found that's been really cool is he's like your cool single uncle. So like how we've talked about like you being the gunkle or whatever, right, in the future. Vibes. It's like him having these like skits where you are like his nephew or niece or whatever, and he's like kind of validating you of like whatever your parents are kind of, or like there's drama in your life, and he's always kind of there for you, and it's like funny, and it's so like heartwarming, and it's kind of like the parental figure everyone wished they had that was like accepting and like fun, and so his stuff is really cool. And then the last person is this girl that I very recently came across, Carissa. I don't know how you pronounce it. It's a Charissa. It's a white girl, but she like caught my attention because her videos are largely about her time when she lived in Thailand. Like she did a master's program in Thailand. And she's just like so weird. So her like bio is something like chaotic but like heartwarming or something like that. And the way that she talks is like all over the place, and she's just like kind of weird, but like in the most heartwarming way. So I really enjoy her. She's just like she's just like bouncing all over the walls, but like kind of socially awkward, but like the story's actually interesting. So anyways, I like these 3.
That sounds very cute. That sounds very cute.
Yes. How about yourself?
Okay, well, not surprisingly, all my shit is gay shit, but I've been following and watching all this content from these drag queens for a while now, so I really like this podcast called Bald and the Beautiful, and it's just like they're just like riffing about random topics, and it is sometimes what I was talking about, where it's like you're bored and you're just talking about random stuff, and it is like completely unhinged. And that's kind of why I like it. It's just like a crazy chaos, and like kind of like what you're talking about with your last girl, where you're just like, what is happening? But I'm still so entertained. I don't understand what's happening, but I'm still so entertained right now. My second is Rob Anderson. He's this guy that does these like small little like skits and stuff, and he's also written like a few like just funny book things, and like made some different like funny merch. He's pretty entertaining.
What's his main like topics or whatever niche that he does skits on?
It's mostly gay stuff, but he has this series called Gay Science. There was another mini one called Boyfriend Twins, where it's like you know those people. Oh, I don't know if you do, but like there's this like trope in the gay community where like two white guys who look identical will date each other. It's called Boyfriend Twins.
Oh, that's funny.
And he's also just done like some other random comedy skits, and written some like ridiculous like merch stuff that people really liked. Yeah.
Okay, that's fun. Well, lots of new recommendations for you listeners. I think
Yes.
We're all about those empowering creators now, since we're also in this world.
Empowering the already big creators, the already bigger than us creators.
Yeah, I mean, I am inspired by and hope for more success for people that are already
course.
successful, because they all started from zero too. So it's like it's encouraging to see.
Agreed.
Well, 2 years in, we did it.
I feel like I need a little bazooka.
Or like in Little Mermaid, where that little seahorse is like blowing a little trumpet in the beginning.
Yes? Don't remember.
No?
It's been a while. But wait, whatever, whichever way.
All right, well, you made it with us, y'all. We made it to the end of the episode. Write us in or comment or like hit us up wherever you prefer to talk to us. But our email is telluswhereyou'refrom@gmail.com. If you have feedback or reflections, favorite things you hated about what we've tried in the past that we should avoid, any of that stuff, because as we mentioned, we are continuing to experiment all the time. So let us know. And one thing I forgot to plug is, as you know, since the last batch, we've been recording and posting our video episodes on YouTube. But I am going to be abroad for the next like year, essentially, starting hopefully in 2-3 weeks. So I'll also be doing kind of like travel diary type things on our YouTube and TikTok. So check this out too. So you know where the F in the world I am when we record.
Sub-series. Where the F in the world is Angela.
Yes.
And tune in next week for another fresh new episode. Until then,
Zaijian, bitches.
bitches.